We're living through a period of economic history that feels less like a cycle and more like a well-planned and targeted assassination. We've already watched around 8,000 firms vanish in the last 2 years. That's 8,000 sets of plant and machinery sold at auction for pennies on the pound, 8,000 local reputations incinerated, and thousands upon thousands of skilled workers wondering why they bothered entering a trade that clearly sees them as expendable. Let's be brutally honest about how this industry works. We've always operated on razor-thin margins. But today, they're so thin, they're translucent. In a good year, a construction firm might hope for a 2 or 3% net profit. And when you work on a 2% margin, you're not running a business, you're performing a high wire act over a pit of fire while the government throws rocks at you. One delayed delivery, 1 week of bad weather, one subcontractor going bust is enough to turn a multi-million-pound project into a massive liability. And there's no safety net. There is no rainy day fund because in the UK construction sector, it's been pouring for 5 years straight. The most immediate threat, obviously, is the chaos in the Middle East. With the ongoing war involving Iran and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices haven't just risen, they're heading into orbit. Every time a tanker is delayed or a headline hits the wires about escalating tensions in the Gulf, the price at the pump jumps. Experts are warning we haven't even seen the peak of this crisis yet. If the Strait remains a geopolitical choke point, the cost of simply turning on a 20-ton digger for the day will become a luxury only the elite can afford. And that comes on top of the red diesel debacle. The removal of the subsidy for construction and demolition was a monumental act of betrayal. To strip that relief away and force firms into white diesel just as global oil prices exploded was at best a display of spectacular incompetence and at worst total negligence. It was an overnight tax hike that many firms simply couldn't absorb. Although politicians and environmentalists apparently believe otherwise, you can't simply electrify a fleet of heavy demolition equipment overnight. And then there's the hangover that nobody seems to want to talk about, the COVID loans. During the pandemic, those loans were a lifeline, but in reality, for many, they're a gilded cage. Now, those chickens are coming home to roost with a vengeance. Companies are being forced to pay back massive amounts of debt, and we're seeing firms that survived the actual pandemic being killed off by the cure. They're working purely to service debt, effectively becoming zombie companies that exist only to keep the banks happy until the liquidator comes calling. We were promised a streamlined global Britain. What we got was a mountain of paperwork and a broken supply chain. Brexit continues to be a slow-motion car crash for construction. It isn't just the cost of materials, it's the friction. Need a specific hydraulic valve from Germany for your crusher? Good luck. Need specialised steel for a structural job? Get in line and prepare to pay a premium. When you combine the Brexit friction with the skyrocketing cost of raw materials, timber, steel and concrete, which have all seen double-digit increases, the original quotes for long-term projects start to look like the over-optimistic ramblings of a crazy person. And if the fuel and materials don't get you, the overheads will. Insurance premiums in the demolition sector are reaching levels that can only be described as extortionate. As the world becomes more volatile, insurers are fleeing the sector or charging fuck you prices to those who stay. We're reaching a point where the cost of simply being allowed to work is enough to put a firm in the red. And meanwhile, we're fighting a desperate war for talent. The cost of living means our workers rightly need more money to keep their own families afloat. Contractors are caught in a pincer movement. They have to pay more to keep their best people, but they're tied into fixed price contracts signed 18 months ago when the world looked very different. Now, you can't tell a bricklayer to take a pay cut because your fuel bill doubled, but you also can't tell a client that the price has gone up mid-job without ending up in court. Is this sustainable? The short answer is absolutely not. We're witnessing the hollowing out of a cornerstone of the British economy. The Tier 1 giants might have the balance sheets to weather the storm, usually by squeezing the subcontractors even harder. But the specialist demolition firms and the mid-sized contractors are being pushed into the abyss. This industry is at a crossroads. We can either acknowledge that the current model of procurement, where the lowest bidder wins, is a recipe for total disaster and collapse. It's time for some brutal honesty. If clients, developers, and the government want a safe, professional, and modern construction sector, they have to be willing to pay for the reality of the 2026 economy. Because if they keep squeezing, there will soon be nothing left to squeeze.